Okay, so before we even get started today, can we just agree that horror is like the stupidest genre? Like, you'd have to be a real idiot to get spooked by— Oh! 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 Hey, I'm Seth, and welcome to Fright Night. I mean NDA.
You might not have noticed if you're not into getting spooked, but this generation of games has brought about a kind of renaissance in the horror genre. I mean, there's never been like a lull in horror games exactly, but just look what horror game meant 15 years ago. The scariest thing in this game is the protagonist. And this is what horror games look like now. But if we take a closer look at a lot of the big horror hits of the last couple years, we'll see there's a pretty consistent formula here. A formula that the horror games of yesteryear didn't necessarily have. I'm not saying horror is the only genre with some common features from game to game. Just look at military shooters. But while some games stick to the formula to maximize profit or make up for a lack of creativity, looking at you, Medal of Honor warfighter, horror games can be incredibly creative, low-budget indie titles, and still abide by a certain set of rules. Just look at SOMA. Just a month from release, it's being hailed as one of the most provocative video game experiences of all time. How did it accomplish that and still manage to color inside the lines?
Well, there's only one way to find out, so let's take all SOMA's basic ingredients, put them together in like a big spooky bowl, and see how they affect our overall experience. But if we're gonna be concocting a big spooky formula, we'd better look the part. What? I didn't want to get my cool lab coat all dirty. This thing costs like $12. Breaking down the horror formula isn't going to do us any good if we don't know what the draw to horror is. So before we start in with the analyzing, we need to know why we like horror.
Yeah, it's really not all that complicated. Horror movies, just like horror games, tend to have a common thread. The Xenomorph, Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, all these icons of horror are predators in the same way that, like, tigers are. Or predators. These guys all prey on humans, and that's really upsetting to the stupid, irrational caveman part of our brain that doesn't understand movies aren't real. So that seems like a bad thing, right? Like something you don't want to happen? Fortunately, your caveman brain is also the one at the controls for fight or flight. When your brain is getting ready to wrestle a bear, the first thing it does is fill your body with good fighting chemicals like adrenaline and dopamine. Basically, it makes you feel awesome. Horror games should make you feel awesome too. Should. But some horror games aren't scary at all and are, in fact, the worst things ever created by mankind. So what separates SOMA from this bargain bin skinny dip into a mountain of salty garbage?
Let's get to the analyzing and find out.
I mean, I wouldn't want you coming down here on your own, you know?
Well, it's definitely creepy down here.
Yep.
Our first ingredient should be obvious. In order to be scared, you can't be super comfy with your surroundings. Since game designers can't make you physically uncomfortable without breaking into your house, they have to stick to the tools games can actually use: visual and aural discomfort. Luckily, some of the things you see or hear can send an immediate signal to your big dumb subconscious that you're not safe. Take death, for example. Why are zombies scary? Because they're so dangerous? No, that can't be it. Zombies are scary because subconsciously you know that death is a sign of danger. If something else died here, you could die here too. It puts you on edge. Stuff like this is also why some horror games can use a break of established rules to such great effect. For example, take something like Ben Drowned. There's nothing scary about game glitches, but when these glitches corrupt what should be possible in an immersive world, it confuses and frightens your lizard brain. A smart artist or visual designer can manipulate you with all kinds of stuff. Like, you ever notice how a xenomorph just has like a big ol' penis right on his head? Sure, your posh, douchey, conscious brain may laugh, but deep down, seeing a skeleton penis devour a human is even more hilarious.
In games like SOMA, discomfort is the foundation. SOMA takes the natural unease of being trapped underwater and builds on it the entire game. Let's digitally add it to our virtual in-game experience.
Discomfort is a good start, but if all you have is discomfort, you've got this game. Not really scary in the traditional sense. Your dad's pixelated junk is uncomfortable, but not an immediate threat. When you add in a clear and present danger to the player, things get more serious. Stress is the bread and butter of a game like Five Nights at Freddy's. Once you're already in an uncomfortable situation, the added burden of trying to juggle all the game's threats with a serious penalty for failure keeps your heart racing. In SOMA, the most stressful situations are parts where you're being chased. The nice thing about pursuit in a horror game is whatever's chasing you has to be chasing you to somewhere, which means you've got a clear goal you're trying to reach. This way, stress is used as an extra flavoring on top of an objective the game has already given you.
Stress for flavor, let's put that in there.
Hello? Mr. Munchie? Did something go wrong?
So, what's a game with just discomfort and stress look like?
Hey!
Oh, that's kinda scary.
Is everything alright?
Hey, keep it down.
God damn it, Carver!
Shut up, I'm trying to get spooked! So how come this isn't scary? Well, think of it like this. You think this guy's really fearing for his life? Look how many dudes are gonna get eaten before him. Lion can't eat everybody. Compare that to this guy. I bet his blood's pumping. This is a rule our dumb subconscious knows well. There's strength in numbers. You're the least safe when you're alone. That's when things are scariest. This is usually the first and easiest thing a good horror game goes for. Amnesia, Outlast, Silent Hill, the key thing in all these games is that you're alone for the majority. Alien Isolation even put it right there in the name. That's how important it is. SOMA is no exception. Nothing in the game would be as effective if there were a bunch of people running around. It's what makes the game's scariest and most profound moments feel so potent. And more importantly, the end of the game wouldn't even be a tenth as powerful and impactful if you weren't alone.
When we add isolation into the mix, the whole thing becomes more potent.
Little pig.
Finally, we can get properly spooked. When Half-Life 2 came out, the chapter We Don't Go to Ravenholm had every player on edge. Some people still skip it when they play through the game to this day. But there is still a problem. The first half of the chapter is the scariest, when you don't know what's coming and you don't have the ideal weapon in your arsenal. By the time you're getting to the end, you've got the shotgun, and you've found an effective way to beat most of the enemies. The horror loses its teeth. This is pretty much universal. In all the best horror stories, from Lovecraft to The Birds, the protagonists always seem to be up against an unassailable force. This is even more important in games, where making the player feel powerful and confident instantly kills any fears they have. You can't skip right to the part where the hero beats Freddy over the head with a big pipe. There's nothing scary about that. And what about this guy? If he could just crush the lion in a big weird crushing machine, you think he'd be worried? The guys at Frictional Games are the kings of making the player feel vulnerable. They do it in SOMA exactly the same way they did it in Amnesia. You can't hurt the enemies, you're not very fast, you're not very good at hiding. Man, you can't even look at a monster without going nuts. Being vulnerable makes you uncomfortable. It makes you stressed. Being isolated makes you vulnerable. More importantly, it's absolutely core to the gameplay and narrative. Dealing with monsters, solving puzzles, gathering clues, all these things are necessary because you can't deal with the threats directly. It's the thread that runs from one obstacle to the next, justifying each gameplay challenge convincingly. It's the glue holding all these elements together, and it's essential to having a scary final product. So now with those 4 things locked down, we finally have a scary game. When the player is uncomfortable, stressed, alone, and vulnerable, they're pretty much guaranteed to get spooked when a skeleman drops down from the ceiling. But there's still one last thing missing from our recipe, something so natural to the horror genre that it's easy to overlook, even though it's maybe the most important ingredient. The one fear that drives all others.
It's not a lake. It's an ocean.
As humans, we have a natural instinct to understand the threats we face. If we can understand them, then we can know how to beat them, or at least we think we can. Knowing the rules automatically takes away from discomfort, stress, and vulnerability. If something can be logically explained, it loses the luster of fear. It's no coincidence that the first line in Alan Wake is a Stephen King quote.
Stephen King once wrote that nightmares exist outside of logic, and there's little fun to be had in explanations. They're antithetical to the poetry of fear. In a horror story, the victim keeps asking why, but there can be no explanation, and there shouldn't be one. The unanswered mystery is what stays with us the longest, and is what we'll remember in the end.
If Stephen King thinks that the opposite of fear is understanding, I think there's something to be said for it. This one thing is the foundation of all horror. It's why SOMA does such an excellent job of confronting unanswerable questions, but we'll get to that in a second. It's why scary games are always dark and in unfamiliar surroundings. It's why even the most grounded horror has an element of the supernatural or the unexplainable. It's why mystery and horror go hand in hand. It's why the xenomorph in Alien Isolation, an emergent AI with no precise rules dictating what it does, is the scariest thing ever imagined by a human brain. The unknown makes us uncomfortable, stresses us out, makes us feel vulnerable and alone. And it does something else. It keeps us open-minded. So I don't know about you, but when I finished SOMA, I didn't understand why it needed to be a horror game. The plot and themes of the game are brilliant, but not really scary. So why the horror wrapper on an idea that didn't really need it? Well, the first thing you might come up with is that horror is what frictional games is best at, but I don't think that gives them enough credit. If they were smart enough to come up with the themes of SOMA, they were smart enough to make a game in a different genre if it worked better. There's probably something more important at play. I think the answer is that those 5 ingredients, discomfort, stress, isolation, vulnerability, and the unknown, put you right where the story needs you to be, mentally and emotionally. Any first-year philosophy pretentious brain-dead idiot can ask the questions, and they do at any opportunity. Can a machine have a soul? Does one's past define their present? What is I? They're old questions, but in order to make you feel the full impact of the concepts, a little more than just asking is needed. That's the benefit of the recipe for fear. Discomfort makes you irrational, stress wears you down, isolation makes you feel alone, vulnerability makes you vulnerable. The unknown causes you to search for an answer even if one doesn't exist. The state SOMA leaves you in strengthens the game immensely by making you experience the psychological trauma of its themes firsthand, and applies the theoretical philosophy to a practical and terrifying situation. More importantly, it's the kind of thing that can only be done in a video game. And that's my favorite kind of thing.
Catherine? Catherine?
So I hope I've given you a valuable cross-section of what went into SOMA and a lot of other horror games. Meanwhile, our recipe should be finishing up right about now. All right, I don't know about you, but I'm pretty thoroughly spooked. So I think I just cooked my camera. Whoops.
Ooh, I'm the ghost of Seth's camera. Thanks for watching this spooky video. No, I'm just kidding, it's just me. Like the video if you liked it, dislike it if you didn't, comment with anything more personal, perhaps subscribe to see some other videos. Whitelisting the site on Adblock is also an awesome way to support me. If you scroll on down to the description, you'll find a link to NDA's Facebook page and my personal Twitter. Sure would be cool to have some more followers. If those things don't cover your use case, you may email me directly at thendashow@gmail.com. Don't forget to stay tuned for more things in the near future.
Hello!